What is up, everyone? It is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. 2022 is just flying by so quickly. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through and talking about all of the books that I read in the month of April. So let's just hop right into it. The first book that I read in April was The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. This story follows a couple who adopt a 6-year-old child that turns up at the hospital that they both work at. However, some things start to happen which starts to make the wife uncomfortable. I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was an interesting read, although some parts very frustrating. Like the husband is not seeing any of these red flags that maybe their child needs extra help, but he is always dismissing these things. Oh, I'm sure this didn't mean to happen. This wasn't the intention. And with that, definitely look up the trigger warnings for this book. Next up, we have The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. So I believe this is my third Lucy Foley book. The writing style very similar to the other Lucy Foley books, where you have this handful of main characters and then the points of view switch between chapters, so you hear all of the characters' thoughts and opinions and views. So in this Paris apartment, the main character is going to visit her brother who lives there, but when she shows up, her brother is nowhere to be found, not answering the phone, not responding to texts. He's effectively disappeared. So the sister is like, what the heck is up? You know, my brother would not do this. And then she starts to talk to the apartment neighbors to see if she can figure out what's up. And then she starts to low-key realize that these apartment neighbors are not telling her the whole truth. So I would give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was an interesting read. I liked the twists at the end, but let me tell you, I'm not sure that anything really happened for the first 150 pages of the book. I was like, what is happening? I've read so many pages thus far, and then a twist happens around that point in time, and you're like, okay, we are starting to figure out this mystery now, finally. Next up, we have One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. This book is about a woman who is grieving the loss of her mom. Her and her mom had this amazing trip planned to go to Italy, but sadly the mother has passed before then. So instead, to sort of find herself, to grieve, the daughter goes to Italy alone and makes it a solo trip instead of a mother-daughter trip. However, in Italy, she actually runs into the 30-year-old version of her mother. So sort of trippy there, you know, some like time warping, time bending stuff. But I would also give this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought the imagery of Italy was so beautiful. You can tell like this would be an awesome place to visit and see. It was a heartwarming story at the end of the day, but there was some parts with the time warp that I was like, about. Next up, we have Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. And I am just so sad about this one. This one is a DNF. I tried so hard to keep reading it, but it literally was like taking me a week. I was in such a slump. Just from the inside cover, I was like, this sounds so interesting. It says, an intimate, bracingly intelligent debut novel about a millennial Irish expat who becomes entangled in a love triangle with a male banker and a female lawyer. Like, does that not sound fascinating? I don't know. I think it was the writing style of this book. I just could not get into it. Next up, we have Hostage by Claire McIntosh. This story is about a flight attendant. They are doing the first non-stop flight between London and Sydney. So this flight is a big occasion where then this main character gets a note that says you need to follow these instructions in order to save your daughter's life. So the story follows this plane hijacking, this woman's family at home, and figuring out why these people want to take over the plane. So I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really interesting read, although some of the aspects of the plot sort of are unbelievable, which I feel like is hard to grapple with while you're reading. So it just seems odd, the choices of the main character. Like, you are really going to risk the lives of that many people as the flight attendant. It just seems off. The next book I read in April was The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker. This book literally starts off with I killed a little boy. It follows this woman 20 years ago and now in the present, where in this girl's childhood, not a spoiler since it's the first line of the book, she killed a neighborhood boy. Going through her home life, her backstory, what led up to this, and what is happening in her childhood life. And then flash forwarding to the present, she now has her own daughter and she's really scared because of her past that maybe her daughter is going to get taken away from her, or she's not a fit mother and she should give her daughter up. I'm giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. The writing style during the chapters of the young version of the main character are written in such an in-depth way that you really get inside of the young main character's head, her likes, her dislikes, her jealousies of her friends. So it's a really interesting read because you're grappling with that duality of the younger character and the bad things that she went through in childhood and the bad things that she did in her childhood, to now, 20 years later, the woman has her own kid and is dealing with other problems. Next up, we have the book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. So this is the story about a woman who, in her free time, she runs a true crime website. So very relatable there with all of the true crime podcasters and stuff nowadays. But this woman has just gained an interview, the rights to talk with the supposed lady killer, who was another woman suspected of murder of 2 men, but was acquitted because there wasn't enough evidence. So this story goes through the mystery of the lady killer. Who is she? Who was she? Was she actually the killer from many years ago, or was she not? So I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I wasn't really a fan of how the book turned out at the ending. It sort of has some paranormal elements with the book, but then by the end, the whole paranormal stuff didn't necessarily really matter, so it felt off that it was such a big part throughout the book. So it was an interesting book, but I don't know, I just felt not satisfied when I finished it. Next up, we have All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. So for this book, there are definitely a lot of trigger warnings because it deals a lot with self-harm and the thought of harming yourself or ending your own life. So this story follows 2 teenagers who meet at the top of a bell tower where they both had the intent of jumping. So these teens, they're in the same high school together. They start a class project together where they're going around their town and seeing the landmarks of their small town. So after reading this book, I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. The topic of self-harm and suicide is a very important topic, so I just felt like those topics didn't really come across maybe in the correct way. When dealing with this topic, it felt like the 2 characters, they see their whole meaning to live and their will to live in this budding romance, so it just sort of feels wrong that it seems like the characters start to heal just because they're falling in love, rather than getting real help from family, friends, or talking with a professional. Next up, we've got Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. So this story follows 2 young adults who are neighbors in an apartment complex, and they start a friends with benefits relationship. However, the girl main character starts to get real feelings, but the guy main character from the start has said this is just a friends with benefits situation, nothing more, no strings attached. So this is my least favorite Colleen Hoover book that I've read so far. I've read a handful of her novels, and I'm giving this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Just the whole thing felt so cringe and cliche. I did find the guy main character's story interesting because it flashes from the present, from the girl main character's point of view, to 6 years prior with the guy main character's point of view, where the guy went through a really tragic and devastating experience which has caused him to be unable to love, to open up again. So honestly, I thought his storyline from 6 years prior was really interesting, and I wanted to just skip through the whole girl's point of view. Every single chapter of hers was just them doing it. So I don't know, I was just not a fan of this. It just felt so cringe and cliche the entire time. Next up, we have Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This story follows a couple who wins a weekend away. They're hoping to rekindle their relationship because things haven't really been going well, but when they're at the weekend away, some sketchy things start to happen. I would also give this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I really dislike in mystery novels like this where at the end of every single chapter they just leave it on a cliffhanger saying like, oh, but we know one of us isn't going to get out alive, or oh, she doesn't know what I'm planning. Like, I really dislike novels that are written like that. As a reader, I'm like, give us clues, let us figure out the mystery, give us some crumbs throughout the book so by the end we can figure things out, not every single chapter ending on a cliffhanger that doesn't really tell you anything. It's so vague. It's just like, yeah, I know something bad is going to happen. This is a mystery novel. Like, obviously there is supposed to be tension here. But if you're just fabricating the tension by ending on cliffhangers, I'm not a fan. Last up for physical books is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. So this story is like a ghost story murder mystery. It has some paranormal elements in there, which is fun. So this novel follows a young woman whose father just passed away, and so she is granted this big house, this estate that her family lived in many years ago when she was a child. However, when her family lived there when she was a kid, some spooky things happened and the family left this big house that they just bought after 20 days. And then her dad goes on to write this really famous book about their time spent in this house of horrors, this haunted house. So now after her father has passed, the daughter goes back to this mansion, the first time since leaving all those years ago, and she's trying to figure out, was her father's book real or was it all a fabrication? So I would give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I think the storyline is so unique and fascinating, definitely different from these other books that I read this month, and it goes like alternating chapters between the present from the daughter's point of view to chapters of the father's book. I just thought the way that this was written was so unique. So going into audiobooks, the first audiobook that I listened to was How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury. So this book was all about relationship advice, what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong in relationships, and how you can hopefully find a long-lasting relationship that would lead to marriage. So I thought this was okay. I feel like I'm not necessarily a fan of self-help books. For this book, you know, some of the relationship advice was interesting and seemingly helpful, but on the other hand, some of the advice also just seems sort of like common sense, very basic advice that maybe isn't the most helpful. And the second and last audiobook that I listened to was Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of a life interrupted by Suleika Jawad. So this book, as the title states, is a memoir where the author is writing about her experience being diagnosed with cancer at the age of 22, going through her experience and journey with the diagnosis, her time spent at hospitals, her recovery, as well as trying to live her life after. So I thought this memoir was really powerful, and it goes through a lot of of like the author's feelings throughout her entire experience and what was going on in her life. So those were the 12 books that I read in the month of April. I feel like I've been reading 12 books every month. Like, I'm pretty sure February and March were also 12 books. So I guess I'm on a roll, but also this seems to be like my upper cap here. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books that I read this month. What were your thoughts on them? Did you like them or dislike them? And then if you have any books that I should read next month, definitely also leave a comment down below because I'm always looking for new things to read. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up to help me out with the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.